we continuing on that book? Let me see. So last time we stopped where they had just found the monster creature they were following, and they found out it wasn't any creature. Yes, this is the page where we stopped. So they had just been hi. They had just been abducted into the mysterious machine that they found after they fell into the sea and were chasing it. And this is where we continue as they drag it down inside it. I mean, they're at least being rescued. They could leave them there to die. This forcible abduction, so hopefully carried out, was accomplished with the rapidity of lightning. I shivered all over. Whom had we to deal with? No doubt some new sort of pirates who explored the sea in their own way. Oh, that would be an interesting type of ship to have. Hardly had the narrow panel closed upon me when I was enveloped in darkness. My eyes, dazzled with the outer light, could distinguish nothing. I felt my naked feet cling to the rings of an iron ladder. Ned Land and Conseil, firmly seized, followed me. At the bottom of the ladder, a door opened and shut after us immediately with a bang. We were alone. Where? I could not say. Hardly imagine. All was black, and such a dense black that, after some minutes, my eyes had not been able to discern even the faintest glimmer. Meanwhile, Ned Land, furious at these proceedings, gave free vent to his indignation. "Confound it!" cried he. "Here are people who come up to this Scotch for hospitality. They only just miss being cannibals. I should not be surprised at it. They declare that it shall not eat me without my protesting." "Calm yourself, friend, Ned, calm yourself," replied Conseil quietly. "Do not cry out before you are hurt. We are not quite done for yet." Yes, I mean, you just captured. We're not... They could be careful. Not quite, sharply replied the Canadian, but pretty near, at all events. Things look black. Happily, my bowie knife I have still, and I can always see well enough to use it. The first of these pirates will lay a hand on me. Do not excite yourself, Ned, I say to the harpooner, and do not compromise us by useless violence. Who knows that they will not listen to us? Let us either try to find out where we are. Sensible. I groped about. In 5 steps I came to an iron wall, made of plates bolted together. Then, turning back, I struck against a wooden table, near which were ranged several stools. The boards of this prison were concealed under a thick mat of formium, which deadened the noise of the feet. The bare walls revealed no trace of windows or door. Conseil, going around the reverse way, met me, and we went back to the middle of the cabin, which measured about 20 feet by 10. As to its height, Ned Land, in spite of his own great height, could not measure it. Half an hour had already passed without our situation being bettered, when the dense darkness suddenly gave way to extreme light. Our prison was suddenly lighted. That is to say, it became filled with a luminous matter, so strong that I could not bear it at first. In its whiteness and intensity, I recognized that electric light which played around the submarine boat like a magnificent phenomenon of phosphorescence. After shutting my eyes involuntarily, I opened them and saw that this luminous agent came from a half-globe, unpolished, placed in the roof of the cabin. "At least one can see," cried Ned Land, who, knife in hand, stood on the defensive. "Yes," said I, "but we are still in the dark about ourselves." "Let master have patience," said the imperturbable Conseil. Always so calm, Conseil. The sudden lightening of the cabin enabled me to examine minutely. It only contained a table and 5 stools. The invisible door might be hermetically sealed. No noise was heard. All seemed dead on the interior of this boat. Did it move? Did it float on the surface of the ocean? Or did it dive into its depths? I could not guess. A noise of boats was now heard. The door opened, and 2 men appeared. One was short, very muscular, broad-shouldered, with robust limbs, strong head, an abundance of black hair, thick moustache, a quick, penetrating look, and the vivacity which characterizes the population of southern France. The second stranger merits a more detailed description. A disciple of Gratiolet or Engel would have read his face like an open book. I made out his prevailing qualities directly. Self-confidence, because his head was well set on his shoulders, and his black eyes looked around with cold assurance. Calmness, for his skin, rather pale, showed his coolness of blood. Energy, evinced by the rapid contraction of his lofty brows, and courage, because his deep breathing denoted great power of lungs. Whether this person was 35 or 50 years of age, I could not say. He was tall, had a large forehead, straight nose, a clearly cut mouth, beautiful teeth, with fine taper hands, indicative of a highly nervous temperament. This man was certainly the most admirable specimen I had ever met. One particular feature was his eyes, rather far from each other, and which could take in nearly a quarter of the horizon at once. This faculty, I verified it later, gave him a range of a vision far superior to Ned Land's. When the stranger fixed upon an object, his eyebrows met, his large eyelids closed around so as to contract the range of his vision, and he looked as if he magnified the objects lessened by distance, as if he pierced those sheets of water so opaque to our eyes, and as if he read the very depths of the seas. That's a very mighty person. The two strangers, with caps made from the fur of sea otter and shod with sea boots of seal skin, were dressed in clothes of a particular texture, which allowed free movement of the limbs. The taller of the two, evidently the chief on board, examined us with great attention, without saying a word. Then, turning to his companion, talked with him in an unknown tongue. It was a sonorous, harmonious, and flexible dialect, the vowels seeming to admit of very varied accentuation. The other replied by a shake of the head, and added 2 or 3 perfectly incomprehensible words. Then he seemed to question me by a look. I replied in good French that I did not know his language, but he seemed not to understand me, and my situation became more embarrassing. If master were to tell our story, said Consul, perhaps the gentleman may understand some words. I began to tell our adventures, articulating each syllable clearly and without omitting one single detail. I announced our names and rank, introducing in person Professor Aronnax, his servant Consul, and Master Ned Land, the harpooner. The man with the soft, calm eyes listened to me quietly, even politely, and with extreme attention. But nothing in his countenance indicated that he had understood my story. When I finished, he said not a word. There remained one resource, to speak English. Perhaps they would know this almost universal language. I knew it, as well as the German language, well enough to read it fluently, but not to speak it correctly. But anyhow, we must make ourselves understood. Go on in your turn, I said to the harpooner. Speak your best Anglo-Saxon and try to do better than I. Ned did not beg off and recommenced our story. To his great disgust, the harpooner did not seem to have made himself more intelligible than I had. Our visitors did not stir. They evidently understood neither the language of Arago nor of Faraday. Very much embarrassed, after having vainly exhausted our philosophical resources, I knew not what part to take, and Consul said, If master will permit me, I will relate it in German. But in spite of the elegant turns and good accent of the narrator, the German language had no success. The troubles of language. At last, nonplussed, I tried to remember my first lessons and to narrate our adventures in Latin. With no better success. This last attempt being of no avail, the two strangers exchanged some words in their unknown language and retired. The door shut. It is an infamous shame, cried Ned Land, who broke out for the 20th time. We speak to those rogues in French, English, German, and Latin, and not one of them has the politeness to answer? Calm yourself, I said to the impetuous Ned. Anger will do no good. But do you see, Professor, replied our irascible companion, that we shall absolutely die of hunger in this iron cage? Bah, said Council philosophically. We can hold out some time yet. My friends, I said, we must not despair. You have been worse off than this. Do me the favor to wait a little before forming an opinion upon the commander and crew of this boat. My opinion is formed, replied Ned Land sharply. They are rascals. How? Because they can't understand each other. Good. And from what country? From the land of rogues. My brave Ned, that country is not clearly indicated on the map of the world. But I admit the nationality of two strangers is rare to determine. Neither English, French, nor German, that is quite certain. However, I am inclined to think that the commander and his companion were born in low latitudes. There is southern blood in them. I cannot decide by the appearance whether they are Spaniards, Turks, Arabians, or Indians. As to their language, it is quite incomprehensible. Relatable. There is the disadvantage of not knowing our language, said the Council, or the disadvantage of not having one universal language. It's true. As he said these words, the door opened. A steward entered. He brought us clothes, coats, and trousers, made of a stuff I did not know. I hastened to dress myself, and my companions followed my example. Yeah, that's right, they were naked since they had ripped their clothes off. During that time, the steward, dumb, perhaps deaf, had arranged the table and laid 3 plates. This is something like, said Consul. Bah, said the rancorous harpooner. What do you suppose they eat here? Tortoise liver, filleted shark, and beef sticks from sea dogs? We shall see, said Council. The dishes of bell metal were placed on the table, and we took our places. Undoubtedly, we had to do with civilized people, and had it not been the electric light which flooded us, I could have fancied I was in the dining room of the Adelphi Hotel at Liverpool, or at the Grand Hotel in Paris. I must say, however, that there was neither bread nor wine. The water was fresh and clear, but it was water, and did not sweeten the land's taste. Amongst the dishes which were, I lost track of where I am. Amongst the dishes which were brought to us, I recognized several fish delicately dressed. But of some, although excellent, I could give no opinion. Neither could I tell to what kingdom they belonged, whether animal or vegetable. As to the dinner service, it was elegant and in perfect taste. Each utensil, spoon, fork, knife, plate, had a letter engraved on it, with a motto above it, of which was an exact facsimile. Mobilis immobili, and there's the engraving here on the side. Mobilis immobile. Freely translated, this Latin phrase means moving in a moving thing. Since the swimmer moves in a moving thing, the ocean, this motto is very apt. The letter N was no doubt the initial of the name of the enigmatical person who commanded at the bottom of the sea. Ned and Conseil did not reflect much. They devoured the food, and I did likewise. I was, besides, reassured as to our fate, and it seemed evident that our hosts would not let us die of want. Yes, that's nice. However, everything has an end. Everything passes away, even the hunger of people who have not eaten for 15 hours. Our appetites satisfied, we felt overcome with sleep. Faith, I shall sleep well, said Conseil. So shall I, replied Ned Land. My two companions stretched themselves on the cabin carpet and were soon sound asleep. For my own part, too many thoughts crowded my brain, too many insoluble questions pressed upon me, too many fancies kept my eyes half open. Where were we? What strange power carried us on? I felt, or rather fancied I felt, the machine sinking down to the lowest beds of the sea. Dreadful nightmares beset me. I saw in these mysterious asylums a world of unknown animals, amongst which the submarine boats seemed to be of the same kind, living, moving, and formidable as they. Then my brain grew calmer, my imagination wandered into vague unconsciousness, and I soon fell into a deep sleep. Chapter 9. Ned Land's Tempers. Always very susceptible. Ned Land. How long we slept, I do not know, but our sleep must have lasted long, for it rested us completely from our fatigues. I woke first. My companions had not moved, and were still stretched in their corner. Radically aroused from my somewhat hard couch, I felt my brain freed, my mind clear. I then began an attentive examination of our cell. Nothing was changed inside. The prison was still a prison, the prisoners, prisoners. However, the steward, during our sleep, had cleared the table. I breathed with difficulty. The heavy air seemed to oppress my lungs. Although the cell was large, it had evidently consumed a great part of the oxygen that it contained. Indeed, each man consumes, in 1 hour, the oxygen contained in more than 176 pints of air. And this air, charged, as then, with a nearly equal quantity of carbonic acid, becomes unbreathable. It became necessary to renew the atmosphere of our prison and adopt the whole in the submarine boat. That gave rise to a question in my mind. How would the commander of this floating dwelling place proceed? Would he obtain air by chemical means, in getting by heat the oxygen contained in chlorate of potash, and in absorbing carbonic acid by caustic potash? Or a more convenient, economical, and consequently more profitable alternative, would he be satisfied to rise and take breath at the surface of the water, like a cetacean, and so renew for 24 hours the atmospheric provision? In fact, I was already obliged to increase my respirations to eke out of this cell the little oxygen it contained, when suddenly I was refreshed by a current of pure air. and perfumed with saline emanations. It was an invigorating sea breeze, charged with iodine. I opened my mouth wide, and my lungs saturated themselves with fresh particles. At the same time, I felt the boat rolling. The iron-plated monster had evidently just risen to the surface of the ocean to breathe, after the fashion of whales. I found out from that the mode of ventilating the boat. That makes sense. When I had inhaled desire freely, I sought the conduit pipe, which conveyed to us the beneficial whiff, and I was not long in finding it. Above the door was a ventilator, through which volumes of fresh air renewed the impoverished atmosphere of the cell. I was making my observations when Ned and Conseil awoke almost the same time, under the influence of this reviving air. They rubbed their eyes, stretched themselves, and were on their feet in an instant. "Did master sleep well?" asked Conseil, with his usual politeness. "Very well, my brave boy. And you, Mr. Land?" "Soundly, Professor. But I don't know if I'm right or not. There seems to be a sea breeze." A seaman could not be mistaken, and I told the Canadian all that had passed during his sleep. "Good," said he. "That accounts for those roarings we heard when the supposed narwhal sighted the Abraham Lincoln?" "Quite so, Master Land. It was taking breath." "Only, Mr. Reverlax, I have no idea of what o'clock it is, unless it is dinner time." "Dinner time, my good fellow? Say rather breakfast time, for we certainly have begun another day." "So, said Council, we have slept 24 hours? "That is my opinion." "I will not contradict you," replied Ned Land. "With dinner or breakfast, the steward will be welcome, whichever he brings." "Master Land, we must conform to the rules of on board, and I suppose our appetites are in advance of the dinner hour." "That is just like you, friend Council," said Ned, impatiently. "You are never out of temper, always calm. You would return thanks before grace, and die of hunger rather than complain." Time was getting on, and we were fearfully hungry, and this time the steward did not appear. It was rather too long to leave us, if they really had good intentions towards us. Ned Land, tormented by the cravings of hunger, got still more angry, and notwithstanding his promise, I dreaded an explosion when he found himself with one of the crew. For 2 hours more Ned Land's tempers increased. He cried, he shouted, but in vain. The walls were deaf. There was no sound to be heard in the boat. All was still as death. It did not move, for I should have felt the trembling motion of the hull under the influence of the screw. Plunged in the depths of the waters, it belonged no longer to earth. The silence was dreadful. I felt terrified. Conseil was calm. Ned Land roared. Just then a noise was heard outside. Steps sounded on the metal flags. The locks were turned, the door opened, and the steward appeared. Before I could rush forward to stop him, the Canadian had thrown him down and held him by the throat. "Ah, Ned Land." The steward was choking under the grip of his powerful hand. Conseil was already trying to unclasp the harpooner's hand from his half-suffocated victim, and I was going to fly to the rescue, when suddenly I was nailed on the spot by hearing these words in French. "Be quiet, Masterland, and you, Professor, will you be so good as to listen to me?" Oh, one of them can finally speak to them. Chapter 10: The Man of the Seas. It was the commander of the vessel who thus spoke. At these words, Ned Land rose suddenly. The steward, nearly strangled, tottered out on a sign from his master. But such was the power of the commander on board that not a gesture betrayed the resentment which this man must have felt towards the Canadian. Conseil, interested in spite of himself, I, stupefied, awaited in silence the result of the scene. The commander, leaning against a corner of the table with his arms folded, scanned us with profound attention. Did he hesitate to speak? Did he regret the words which he had just spoken in French? One might almost think so. After some moments of silence, which did not one of us dreamed of breaking, "Gentlemen," said he, in a calm and penetrating voice, "I speak French, English, German, and Latin equally well. I could, therefore, have answered you at our first interview. But I wish to know you first, then to reflect. The story told by each one, entirely agreeing in the main points, convinced me of your identity. I know now that chance has brought before me Mr. Pierre Aronnax, Professor of Natural History at the Museum of Paris, entrusted with a scientific mission abroad, Conseil, his servant, and Ned Land, of a Canadian origin, harpooner on board the frigate Abraham Lincoln of the Navy of the United States of America." I bowed assent. It was not a question that the commander put to me, therefore there was no answer to be made. This man expressed himself with perfect ease, without any accent. His sentences were well turned, his words clear, and his fluency of speech remarkable. Yet I did not recognize in him a fellow countryman. He continued the conversation in these terms. "You have doubtless thought, sir, that I have delayed long in paying you the second visit. The reason is that, your identity recognized, I wished to waive materially what part to act towards you. I have hesitated much. Most annoying circumstances have brought you into the presence of a man who has broken all the ties to humanity. You have come to trouble my existence." "Unintentionally," said I. "Unintentionally?" replied the stranger, raising his voice a little. "Is it unintentionally that the Abraham Lincoln pursued me all over the seas? Was it unintentionally that you took passage in this frigate? Was it unintentionally that your cannonballs rebounded off the plating of my vessel? Was it unintentionally that Mr. Ned Land struck me with his harpoon?" I detected a strained irritation in these words. But to these recriminations I had a very natural answer to make, and I made it. "Sir," said I, "no doubt you are ignorant of the discussions which have taken place concerning you in America and Europe, You do not know that diverse accidents caused by collision with a submarine machine have excited public feeling in the two continents. I omit the hypothesis without number by which it was sought to explain the inexplicable phenomenon of which you alone possess the secret. But you must understand that, in pursuing you over the high seas of the Pacific, the Abraham Lincoln believed itself to be chasing some powerful sea monster, of which it was necessary to rid the ocean at any price. A half smile curled the lips of the commander. Then, in a calmer tone, "Mr. Aronnax," he replied, "dare you affirm that your frigate would not as soon have pursued and cannonaded a submarine boat as a monster?" This question embarrassed me, for certainly Captain Farragut might not have hesitated. He might have thought it his duty to destroy a contrivance of this kind, as he would a gigantic narrow. "You understand then, sir," continued the stranger, "that I have the right to treat you as enemies." I answered nothing, purposely. For what good would it be to discuss such a proposition, and force could destroy the best arguments? "I have hesitated for some time," continued the commander. "Nothing obliged me to show you hospitality. If I chose to separate myself from you, I should have no interest in seeing you again. I could place you upon the deck of this vessel, which has served you as a refuge. I could sink you beneath the waters, and forget that you had ever existed. Would not that be my right?" "It might be the right of a savage," I answered, "not that of a civilized man." "Professor," replied the commander quickly, "I am not what you call a civilized man. I have done with society entirely, for reasons which I alone have the right of appreciation. I do not therefore obey its laws, and I desire you never to allude to them before me again." This was said plainly. A flash of anger and disdain kindled in the eyes of the unknown, and I had a glimpse of a terrible past in the life of this man. Not only had he put himself beyond the pale of the human laws, but he had made himself independent of them, free in the strictest acceptation of the word, quite beyond their reach. Who then would dare to pursue him at the bottom of the sea, when, on its surface, he defied all attempts made against him? What vessel could resist the shock of the submarine monitor? What cuirass, however thick, could withstand the blows of his spur? No man could demand from him an account of his actions. God, if he believed in one, his conscience, if he had one, were the sole judges to whom he was answerable. These reflections crossed my mind rapidly, whilst the stranger personage was silent, absorbed, and as if wrapped up in himself. I regarded him with fear, mingled with interest, as doubtless Oedipus regarded the Sphinx. After a rather long silence, the commander resumed the conversation. I have hesitated," said he, "but I have thought that my interest might be reconciled with that pity to which every human being has a right. You will remain on board my vessel, since fate has cast you there. You will be free, and in exchange for this liberty I shall only impose one single condition. Your word of honor to submit to it will suffice. Speak, sir, I answered. I suppose this condition is one which a man of honor may accept. Yes, sir, it is this. It is possible that certain events, unforeseen, may oblige me to consign you to your cabins for some hours or some days, as the case may be. As I desire never to use violence, I expect from you, more than all the others, a passive obedience. In thus acting, I take all the responsibility. I acquit you entirely, for I make it an impossibility for you to see what ought not to be seen. Do you accept this condition? They remain prisoners, but as long as they don't break it, they are free to walk on board. Is that what he means? Then things took place on board which, to say the least, were singular, and which ought not to be seen by people who were not placed beyond the pale of social laws. Amongst the surprises which the future was preparing for me, this might not be the least. We accept, I answered. Only I will ask your permission, sir, to address one question to you. One only. Speak, sir. You said that we should be free on board, entirely. I ask you, then, what you mean by this liberty? Just the liberty to go, to come, to see, to observe, even all that passes here, save under rare circumstances. The liberty, in short, which we enjoy ourselves, my companions and I. It was evident that we did not understand one another. Pardon me, sir, I resumed, but this liberty is only what every prisoner has of pacing his prison. It cannot suffice us. It must suffice you, however. What? We must renounce forever seeing our country, our friends, our relations again? Yes, sir. But to renounce that unendurable worldly yoke which men believe to be liberty is not perhaps so painful as you think. Well, exclaimed Ned Land, never will I give my word of honor not to try to escape. I did not ask you for a word of honor, Master Land, answered the commander coldly. Sir, I replied, beginning to get angry in spite of myself, you abuse your situation towards us. It is cruelty. No, sir, it is clemency. You are my prisoners of war. I keep you, when I could, by a word, plunge you into the depths of the ocean. You attacked me. You came to surprise a secret which no man in the world must penetrate, the secret of my whole existence. And you think that I am going to send you back to that world which must know me no more? Never. In retaining you, it is not you whom I guard, it is myself. These words indicated a resolution taken on the part of the commander, against which no arguments would prevail. So, sir, I rejoined, you give us simply the choice between life and death. Simply. My friends, said I, to a question thus put, there is nothing to answer. But no word of honor binds us to the master of this vessel? None, sir, answered the unknown. Then, in a gentler tone, he continued. Now, permit me to finish what I have to say to you. I know you, Mr. Aronnax. You and our companions will not, perhaps, have so much to complain of in the chance which has bound you to my fate. You will find amongst the books which are my favorite study, the work which you have published on the depths of the sea. I have often read it. You have carried your work as far as terrestrial science permitted you. But you do not know all. You have not seen all. Let me tell you then, Professor, that you will not regret the time passed on board of my vessel. You are going to visit the land of marvels. These words of the commander had a great effect upon me. I cannot deny it. My weak point was touched, and I forgot for a moment that the contemplation of these sublime subjects was not worth the loss of liberty. Besides, I trusted to the future to decide this grave question, so I contented myself with saying, "By what name ought I to address you?" "Sir," replied the commander, "I am nothing to you but Captain Nemo, and you and your companions are nothing to me but the passengers of the Nautilus." Nautilus. It's a nice name. Captain Nemo called. A steward appeared. The captain gave him orders in that strange language which I did not understand. Then, turning towards the Canadian and consul, "Our repast awaits you in your cabin," said he. "Be so good as to follow this man. And now, Mr. Aronnax, our breakfast is ready. Permit me to lead the way." "I am at your service, Captain." I followed Captain Nemo, and as soon as I had passed through the door, I found myself in a kind of passage lighted by electricity, similar to the waist of a ship. After we had proceeded a dozen yards, a second door opened before me. I then entered a dining room, decorated and furnished in severe taste. High oaken sideboards, inlaid with ebony, stood at the two extremities of the room, and upon their shelves glittered china, porcelain, and glass of inestimable value. The plate on the table sparkled in the rays which the luminous ceiling shed around, while the light was tempered and softened by exquisite paintings. It must cost a fortune to have such a machine after all. In the center of the room was a table, richly laid out. Captain Nemo indicated the place I was to occupy. The breakfast consisted of a certain number of dishes, the contents of which were furnished by the sea alone, and I was ignorant of the nature and mode of preparation of some of them. I knowledge that they were good, but they had a peculiar flavor which I easily became accustomed to. These different aliments appeared to me to be rich in phosphorus, and I thought they must have a marine origin. Captain Nemo looked at me. I asked him no questions, but he